We are going to talk about the shoulder mobility test in the functional movement screen. So if you're not familiar, it's a simple fist-to-fist test to look at asymmetry and range of motion in both shoulders. So from the back, you're essentially going to go fist-to-fist to get as close as you can get. This bottom arm's going through abduction and internal rotation. This top arm's going through abduction and external rotation. And then we're going to compare the differences left to right. So right away, there's a lot of things that you should know about shoulder mobility that play into how well we can actually execute this test. Number one is range of motion in the upper part of your spine, so your T-spine. That hump that should be slightly forward is essential. If we don't have enough extension and rotation through that portion of the spine, we're going to be severely limited in how well we can produce rotation at the shoulder. And so this gives us a lot of groundwork for why we do extension rotation based exercises, whether we're on all fours doing a quadruped rotation, whether we're up in a half kneel doing a rotation here. We want to create some extension through that spine as well as produce some rotation. Second, if your head's out of position, we can run into a lot of problems as well. Anything above or below that joint can lead to some problems, and so we want to make sure that we restore optimal alignment and optimal ranges of motion in all the areas around the shoulder. When it comes to breathing patterns, we see people with shoulder mobility issues that don't have any surgeries or have anything leading up to that point tend to have some poor or aberrant breathing patterns, meaning they've got a nice open scissored posture with their ribs flared, so the diaphragm's not going to be able to function optimally, but they still need to breathe. And so what happens is they trigger accessory muscles of respiration on top of the rib cage in the shoulder, neck, jaws to actually lift the rib cage up to inhale that breath. And so they tend to be mouth breathers. They tend to have a lot of accessory tone up here that basically is going to stiffen up their shoulders and allow for a poor representation of how mobile they are on the test. If we look at the PRI model, there's also some asymmetry patterns that we fall into. So standing here, I usually tend to have a low right shoulder, and it has to do with how our diaphragm functions on the left versus right side, the direction we drive air, and ultimately positions and postures that we assume throughout the day that tend to be fairly predictable and run us into a lot of problems from a neuromuscular standpoint. So there's a lot of things that play into this, but some of the corrections that we can use or that we like to use in our practice are, number one, breathing. We want to restore a zone of apposition, which means that the ribs are down, we've got a nice cylinder through the core, and we're able to properly use our diaphragm because it's now folded back over itself and can function moving up and down within our thorax when we breathe. If we can use the diaphragm properly, a lot of times we can shut down accessory tone up here and the shoulders will unlock. If we can get air to the proper compartment, and it usually tends to be the lateral right chest wall, we can usually create some mobility because we're elevating that shoulder back to a position that it needs to be. And now that we've got apical expansion or expansion to the upper part of this right lung, this shoulder will tend to function a little bit better. There are some osseous changes that occur with development. So people who play baseball or overhead sports where they throw a lot, they tend to compromise how much range of motion they have from side to side on one arm versus the other. Now, a certain level of asymmetry is acceptable. However, when it becomes significant, we want to be careful. You don't want to lock somebody into a barbell and have them press overhead while they've got great mobility here to achieve it, and they have to use a faulty strategy to get in over this arm. And so we'll do a lot of single-handed pressing where we've got kettlebells or the landmine is kind of a transitional overhead exercise. But some of the other exercises we use are wall slides. Okay, so we line people up with a proper spine next to a wall, and we ask them to perform some wall angels, basically sliding their elbows and wrists up the wall like they're sliding up a door frame, and creating 3 points of contact from the butt, the upper back, and the head while they're going through this exercise. We'll use arm bars. It's a tremendous exercise to learn how to pack the shoulder and create some internal and external rotation while working on your breathing patterns as well. So this can be kind of a catch-all. We put people into ribs depressed, get their shoulders packed, and then we start going through that internal and external range of motion to allow them to unlock some things. If there's any soft tissue work that we need, we'll work on the posterior cuff, we'll work on the lats, the pecs, things that can tend to bind up the shoulders a little bit, and some of the accessory muscles of respiration as well that may be chronically tight that a massage therapist or even a lacrosse ball can get into if you really know what you're doing. But the shoulder mobility test is one of the hardest for people to pass, and I think it comes down to a lot of predictable patterns again, where you've got thumbs on keypads, eyes on monitors, hands on steering wheels. We tend to be slouched over. We kind of live in this world where we're always anterior, and sometimes we can lose range of motion. So things to watch out for are really anything overhead, any kind of open chain pressing, bench pressing, shoulder pressing are just kind of red flags for us, because we want to make sure that people achieve a level of asymmetry that's acceptable by our standards. By no means is it ever going to be perfect, and by no means does anybody need to demonstrate that they've got hypermobility or tremendous range of motion. We just need to reach an adequate level that says that on some level we feel safe and confident that giving them the exercises we're choosing for them is going to be beneficial to their performance or to their fat loss muscle building program, whatever it is. If it's really an issue, then maybe we do need to scale back and find alternate options that are going to be sufficient to get them where we want to go. So to recap, there's several reasons why the shoulders become stiff, bound up, tight. A lot of it translates to neuromuscular imbalances and postures that we assume every day. And the things that we can do to correct are restore range of motion to the thoracic spine, get any soft tissue work to the areas around the shoulder that we need to create some mobility, and work on breathing patterns to help make sure that we don't create any hypertonic or overly tense muscles up and around the shoulder girdle that are stemming from an inability to really properly use the diaphragm. This has been a review of our shoulder mobility test, ways you can correct it, and what we're looking for in terms of sufficiency with the shoulder mobility test. I'm Ryan Patrick with Peak Fitness and Sports Training. Tune in next time as we